So tonight I am here to introduce our speaker, Avi Melamed, who is a geopolitical expert on the Middle East, an intelligence analyst, founder of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspectives, which is an apolitical, non-partisan educational nonprofit institute. He's a former Israeli intelligence official and senior Arab affairs advisor, and is fluent in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. He's the author of 3 books on the region, most recently Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, which he wrote together with Maya Hoffman, who is his wife and business partner, and I had the pleasure of enjoying dinner with both of them earlier tonight, so it was great to meet them both. He's also an author, producer, and host of a newly released documentary series on Jerusalem called The Seam Line, which explores the many layers of the conflict in and over and around Jerusalem. We actually were talking about finding a way to show that here at the JCC at some point in the future, so I'm hoping that we can do that because I think it would offer a lot of insight into what's going on in the area. Avi is also a frequent commentator on international media platforms, including many, but among them BBC, CNN, Fox, I-24 News, Sky News, and many more, and has been featured in ABC, AP, Bloomberg, Financial Times, The Hill, NBC, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, and serves as a permanent contributor to USA Today. And quickly, before I turn over the microphone to Avi, I started reading his latest book, Inside the Middle East, earlier today, and I enjoyed in his preface, there was one line I just wanted to share with you before I turn him over, and he says, in the preface to the book, my bio lists my background: counterterrorism professional, intelligence official, Middle East expert, policy advisor, senior official on Arab affairs, social entrepreneur, etc. But to me, the most important title I have is as an educator. And I know he's done a huge amount of work on our college campuses, with young people, with adults across the country and the world, helping to bring some sanity to what is a difficult region to understand, and I think we're very lucky to have him here. So please help me welcome him tonight.
Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. I know that you can hear me, you're not the problem. The problem is in the back. My wife waves, it means that everything is fine, she didn't get a panic attack. I'm very honored to be here tonight with you, and thank you for this lovely presentation. We are going to talk about a pivotal moment in the story of the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the October 7, but we are going to talk about it from a wider perspective, trying to understand a couple of things from a geostrategic perspective, why this is such a significant moment, and we will try to explore different aspects regarding that. So right here in front of you, you could see the agenda of the session tonight. The opening part will be some sort of a framing that is very much needed in order to talk about what I'm going to talk about. And then we will move to the main part of the presentation. One part will deal with the question, what led to October 7? What were the forces and the developments and the currents that led to October 7? The second part will be to explore what happened since October 7 and why. Why did we see the expansion of the conflict into arenas that seemingly have nothing to do with that? And then the concluding part, looking at where we are today from a geostrategic perspective, more than 1 year after October 7, and trying to understand where things are heading. And of course, in the end of my presentation, which will be in about 15 minutes from now, we will have Q&A. So I'm going to start with some very general framing. You see the map that basically presents a couple of territories. I would say you see the Star of David that represents the state of Israel. To the right-hand side, you see Jordan, Arab state that borders Israel from the east. You see this area that is titled Fatah, Palestinian Territory, or Palestinian Authority. This is an area that has different names. It's known by the name of the West Bank, the Palestinian territories, the occupied territories, Judea and Samaria. It depends how you want to call it. The reason it's kind of like titled the Fatah Palestinian Authority is because today, about 50% of the West Bank is ruled by the Palestinian Authority. This is an entity that was established formally following the Israeli PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization agreement from 1993 that is known by the name of the Oslo Accords. This is an agreement that was basically laying the roadmap towards two-state solution. Fatah is the major spine of the Palestinian Authority, and as I said before, the Palestinian Authority today rules about 50% of the West Bank and about 90% of the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, around 1.7 million Palestinians. The rest, 50% of the West Bank, is ruled by Israel, and under Israel's rule over that part of the West Bank, which is not annexed to the state of Israel, it's ruled by a civil administration and military governments. Under Israel's rule in that part of the West Bank, there are some 500,000 Israelis who live in communities, rather also known by the name of settlements, in the West Bank, and next to them a population of some 250,000 Palestinians that live under Israel's rules in the 50% of the West Bank. To the left-hand side in the bottom, you can see Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is a small area, it's a small strip, it's about 8 by 20 miles, populated, roughly speaking, by some 2 million Palestinians, maybe less. There are different numbers. I'm using that number because it's the common one. And you could see this logo right here representing Hamas, a Palestinian Islamic movement that was born in Gaza Strip in 1987, and later on we will shortly elaborate about Hamas as well. So let's look at some contemporary milestones in the story of Gaza Strip. Between 1948 and 1967, Gaza Strip was ruled by Egypt, but it was not annexed to Egypt. Following the 6 Days War, Israel occupied Gaza Strip and Israel ruled Gaza Strip until 2005. During that period of time, Israeli governments established in Gaza Strip communities or settlements, if you wish, 21 settlements with a population of some 10,000 Israelis who lived in Gaza Strip. They were secured by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza Strip. In 2005, Israeli government passed a law that is called disengagement, and based upon that law, Israel pulled out from Gaza Strip, totally evacuating all the settlements. All the settlers that lived in Gaza Strip were relocated inside Israel. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, left Gaza Strip, and Israel handed control over Gaza Strip to the hands of the Palestinian Authority. The rule of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza Strip didn't last long, because a year and a half later, in the summer of 2007, Hamas, an Islamic Palestinian movement that was established in Gaza in 1987, Hamas conducted a military coup in Gaza Strip, violently terminating the rule of the Palestinian Authority, and since 2007, Hamas has been ruling Gaza Strip. October 7, I'm sure that you are all familiar with the events of that terrible day. Hamas and Islamic Jihad conducted a sudden attack on the state of Israel, attacking Israeli communities in proximity to Gaza Strip. As of now, there are 100 Israeli hostages that are still in captivity in Gaza Strip. In the years since October 7, and we will elaborate on that later on, we saw how this conflict has expanded to different arenas, including arenas that are very remote, like Iraq and Yemen, Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon. We will understand during this session tonight how and why those arenas are involved in what happened following October 7. The most recent update in the context of the war is the Israeli-Hezbollah ceasefire that was achieved recently in Lebanon. This is kind of like currently quite fragile ceasefire, but still holding on at least for this moment. So now let us move and start talking about what led to October 7. But before that, with your permission, I want to do some very short framing because it's essential to understand what I'm going to explain. You cannot understand the Middle East without understanding some of the major power struggles that shaped the Middle East to its core through the history. One is a power struggle within Islam. Islam is the major religion of most people in the Middle East. Islam emerged in the Middle East in the 7th century, in the Arab Peninsula, and very quickly became a conquering empire known by the name of Caliphate. Very quickly there has been a growing power struggle within Islam regarding the question who is entitled to lead this caliphate. This power struggle resulted in two major camps in Islam. Majority of the Muslims are known by the name of Sunnis. They are about 84%. The Sunnis argue that leading the caliphate in the Muslim world should be done by a person that will be elected to that position based upon his skills and capacities. The other camp, which is the minority known as Shirat Ali, the political faction of Ali, or in short, Shia. The Shiites, about 14% of the Muslims today, the Shiites argue that leading of the Muslim world should be done only by a male descendant of the fourth king, the fourth caliph of the Muslim empire, Ali bin Abi Talib, who was the son-in-law and cousin of Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Ali was assassinated in the middle of the 7th century. The Shiites, the major branch of the Shiites, known as the 12ish, believes that since Ali there has been line of 12 spiritual leaders, all of them are male descendant of Ali, and they believe that each and every one of them has been connected to a divine source of knowledge. Therefore, they are immune from mistakes and they have to be blindly obeyed. The Shiites call those people, those figures, Imam, which means a spiritual leader. By the way, the Shiites believe that the last one of them disappeared in the 9th century as a little boy, but they believe he is not dead. They believe he is alive and waiting outside of time and history to be summoned up to come and to lead mankind to salvation. He is rather known by the name of Al-Mahdi, which means the Messiah, if you want. He is known also by the name of the Imam al-Ghaib, which means the anticipated or the absent Imam. He is also known in Arabic by the name of Sahib al-Zaman, which means the master of time. Remember this figure of Imam, shortly we'll understand why is it relevant. Another major power struggle that shakes the region to its core for centuries is between three major civilizations. The Arab civilization gave birth to Islam. Islam was born in the Arab civilization. Most of the Arabs are Sunnis. However, there is a large segment of the Arabs who are Shiites as well. Remember that, it's very significant. Then you got the Persian civilization. The Persians are not Arabs, they are not from the Arab Peninsula, they are from Persia, they don't speak Arabic, they speak Farsi, and most of the Persians are Shiites. Then you got Turkey. The Turks are neither Arabs nor Persians. They are not from the Arab Peninsula, they are not from Persia, they don't speak Arabic, they don't speak Farsi, they speak Turkish, and they are from Central Asia. Most of the Turks are Sunnis. So you got three major civilizations: Turkish, predominantly Sunni; Arab, predominantly Sunni, but with a large Shiite segment; and Persian, predominantly Shiite as well. Now that we did this framing, we can start talking about what has led to October 7. October 7 is actually the outcome of a confluence of three major ideologies, radical ideologies, that gained momentum in the Middle East as of the last third of the 20th century. Two out of those three ideologies are ancient. The third one is contemporary. The ancient ones are coming from the hub of both Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam. The common denominator of the Sunni ideology and the Shiite ideology is that they are both envisioning a global entity that is an Islamic one, where you do not have an independent statehood. In the Sunni model, this vision is known as the Caliphate model. In the Shiite vision, it is known by the name of the Imamate, named after the term that I explained before, the Imam. Though they have common denominator in their outlook of a world that is ruled according to the Islamic religious law, the Sharia, the Codex, they are different one from the other in many aspects, and particularly they are in competition, not to say rivalry, one with the other. One of the common denominator, however, between those two ideologies is that they are globalist, radical, and expansionist, and they are totally rejecting Western civilization. They view the Western civilization as a declining civilization that is doomed to disappear. When you look here on the left-hand side, you could see a couple of logos representing some of the groups that are coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate vision. Like, for example, you see on the top this green logo with these two swords representing the biggest mass movement in the Muslim Sunni world, known by the name of the Muslim Brotherhood. You probably heard this name. The Muslim Brotherhood were established in Egypt in 1928. They are coming from the hub of Sunni Islam. Beneath the Muslim Brotherhood, you could see, for example, the logo of Hamas. Hamas was established in Gaza Strip in 1987, and Hamas formally defines itself as the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. This is the formal definition Hamas defines itself. The word Hamas, by the way, means a religious enthusiasm, and it's also the initials, I will say it in Arabic and I will translate, of Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement. I want you to remember this term resistance. Shortly we will understand why it's significant. Beneath Hamas you see this black flag that you may recognize. This is another organization called ISIS. ISIS is also coming from the hub of Sunni Caliphate vision. Beneath ISIS you see another logo. This is yet another Palestinian Islamic organization that is called Islamic Jihad in Palestine. And there are many more other organizations that are coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate model. If you look to the right-hand side, looking at the Shiite Imamate model, you see a couple of the organizations that are coming from that hub. Like, for example, you see the yellow logo on top. This is the logo of Hezbollah. You probably heard this name. The Hezbollah, two words in Arabic, which means the party of God. This is one of the major organizations that is coming from the hub of this Shiite Imamate vision. Beneath the Hezbollah, you see another yellow sign, a logo. This is the logo of a congregation of Iraqi Shiite militias, known by the name of the Popular Mobilization Units, PMU, or in Arabic, Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi. Beneath them, you see this white script representing an interesting military power in the region, coming also from the hub of the Shiite Imamate. This is a military power that is called Ansar Allah, the Disciples of Allah, and this is the military wing of an entity that you probably heard about for the last year called Houthis, the Houthi in Yemen. The Houthi in Yemen are a congregation of Shiite tribes in Yemen, from the northern part of Yemen. They are about 35% of the Yemenite population, and Ansar Allah is the military wing of the Houthis. Beneath them you see the logo of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, the major spine of the Mullah regime in Tehran, and beneath that another Iraqi Shiite group that is called Harakat al-Nujaba, the movement of the noble ones. So these are a couple of examples of the groups coming from both Shiite Imamate camp as well as Sunni Caliphate camp. But then there is another ideology. Remember I said there are three ideologies, and the third one is a contemporary one. This is an ideology that appeared in the Middle East in the middle of the 20th century, and it's known by the name of the resistance and defiance. In Arabic, al-Muqawama wal-Mumana. Similar to the Sunni Caliphate model and the Shiite Imamate model, the resistance also vows a non-compromising animosity towards the West, Western civilizations and Western values. It views the West as a declining and decaying force, and it vows to eliminate the presence of the Western civilization in the Muslim and the Arab world. One other thing that it also vows is to eliminate the state of Israel under the banner of liberating Palestine. These are the three ideologies, and in the last third of the 20th century, they are gaining momentum across the Middle East. A significant milestone is in 1979, there is an Islamic revolution in Iran. Iran becomes a Shiite theocracy under the leadership of the Mullah regimes. The Mullahs are the Shiite clergies, and they basically are taking over Iran in 1979. This is a regime that, to its core, is incentivized and inspired by the vision of the Shiite imamate. It also inspired by the deep Shiite narratives that argue that it was the Shiites who were supposed to lead the Muslim world, but the crown of leadership allegedly was stolen from them by the Sunni Arabs back in the 7th century. And so when this regime came into power, incentivized and inspired by those ideologies, this regime is actually translating those narratives and ideologies into operational blueprint of expansion across the Middle East under the title of exporting the Islamic Revolution. So one of the things that is done in that frame, exporting the Islamic Revolution, in 1980, the Mullah regime is establishing in Lebanon what is going to become its most powerful proxy, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Parallel to that, when you look across the map, you could see that now we see, starting from the last third of the 20th century, the emergence of different armed groups, organizations, movements that are coming either from the Sunni Caliphate model or from the Shiite Imamate hub. So we mentioned Hezbollah coming from the Shiite Imamate in the 1980s. At the same decade, in the 1980s, Islamic Jihad and Hamas are appearing. They are coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate. In 1988, in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda is established. Al-Qaeda, 9/11, Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda is coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate model. By the way, the term Al-Qaeda means the foundation, the base. Then you got in 1994, the rule of the Taliban in Afghanistan, also coming from the hub of the Sunni vision. In 1992, you see the establishing of Ansar Allah, the military power of the Shiite Houthis in Yemen. In 2014, you see, in 2004, you see the emergence of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. ISIS is coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate. In 1987, Hamas is establishing itself in Gaza Strip, and in 2007, Hamas is basically taking control over Gaza Strip. And so when you look across the map, you could see how both the Sunni Caliphate model and the Shiite Imamate model are gaining momentum across the region, across the Middle East, and basically they are enormously shaping the geostrategic landscape of the region. The major tool, mechanism that is responsible for that is a network of armies of terror scattered across the Middle East, starting as of the last third of the 20th century, known by the name of the Axis of Resistance, or in Arabic, Mihwar al-Muqawama. This is a network of armies of terror that are massively armed, supported, backed, guided by the Mullah regime in Tehran. And the purpose of this axis of terror is, in the end of the day, to fulfill the mullah regime vision of the Shiite imamate and to position the mullah regime as the superpower, as the hegemonic superpower in the Middle East, at the expense of their ancient rivalries, the Sunnis, Arabs. When you look at the members of this axis of resistance, you find something very interesting. You will not find Iranians in those armies of terror. They are all based upon Arabs. Hezbollah in Lebanon is based upon Lebanese Arabs in their ethnicity. The Iraqi Shiite militias are based upon Iraqis who are Arabs. Ansar Allah, the Houthis, are based upon Yemenites who are Arabs in their ethnicity. You will also find two other members of this axis, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip. They are also Arabs in their ethnicities. They are not Persians, they are Arabs. And then there is another interesting thing. They are basically representing different nationalities, Arab nationalities. Hezbollah in Lebanon are Lebanese. Iraqi Shiite militias are Iraqis. The Yemenite in Yemen are Yemenite. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are Palestinians. And when you look at what those members of the axis of resistance have been doing, to a large extent, they are operating against the interest and well-being of their own brothers and sisters and their own homelands. Hezbollah in Lebanon basically terrorized Lebanese and occupied Lebanon from within with its Iranian weapons in the service of the mullah regime in Tehran. Iraqi Shiite militias that are part of the Iraqi establishment but at the same time are obeying the mullah regime in Iran, those Iraqi Shiite militias basically also terrorized their own brothers in Iraq. The Houthis in Yemen conducted a military coup in 2014, ousting a legitimate Yemenite government, and ever since then there has been a war going on in Yemen that is basically split to two, if not more than two. In Gaza Strip, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, particularly following 2007 when Hamas took over Gaza Strip, basically dragged their own brothers and sisters in Gaza to a repeating military rounds with Israel, resulting havoc and death and destruction. So this is a very interesting phenomenon when you see local factors that are acting against their own brothers and sisters, literally speaking. And they are doing that in the service of a foreign entity, in our case, the mullah regime in Iran. What is the explanation for that interesting phenomenon? Well, the explanation is that, at least when you are talking about the Shiite members of this axis, the explanation is that they are saying, for us, the most significant component of identity is not the fact that we are Arabs, or the fact that we are Lebanese, or Iraqis, or Yemenites. No. For us, the most significant component of identity is the fact that we are Shiites. And we view the mullah regime in Tehran as our highest source of authority. But then there is another interesting phenomenon. When you look at Gaza Strip, we mentioned Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are not Shiites. They are Sunnis. The Palestinians are not Shiites. They are Sunnis. So you may wonder what brings Hamas and Islamic Jihad that are coming from the hub of the Sunni Caliphate model. What brings them to be a significant member in an axis that they are acting against their own brothers and sisters at the service of the mullah Shiite regime in Tehran? The answer for that is that they all share the concept of the resistance, namely the elimination of the state of Israel under the banner of liberating Palestine. The issue of liberating Palestine is a very present discussion topic in the emotional, political, cultural, emotional discussion in the Muslim and in the Arab world. And the axis of resistance very effectively monetize that slogan in order to basically entrench itself deep in the heart of Arab states. By marketing to the Arab nations the slogan, we, the axis of resistance under the leadership of Iran, we will liberate Palestine. We will bring Israel to an end. In the many posters and other means of propaganda published by this axis, I chose to show you this one because it's very interesting for a couple of reasons. I don't know if you could recognize, but if you look at this poster, you see in the middle a very famous location, site. This is a very known architecture building, beautiful one, that is known by the name, it has different names, known in English by the name of the Dome of the Rock. In Arabic it's known as Qubat al-Sakhra, in Hebrew it's called Kipat al-Sela. It's located in a compound in the old city in Jerusalem, a compound that is known by the name of the Temple Mount compound, Har HaBayit, or in Arabic, Al-Haram al-Sharif. This compound, Al-Haram al-Sharif, also rather referred to in Arabic as Al-Aqsa. And this is the third holiest site of the Muslims. Muslims have three holy sites. Two of them are in Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina. They are under the custodian of the Saudis. And the third one is in Jerusalem, but it's under Israel's rules since 1967. One of the major slogans that the axis of resistance have been constantly marketing was Sanusalli bil-Quds, meaning we will pray in Jerusalem, meaning the Muslims will be praying in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds, but obviously not under Israel's rule. Once Israel is going to be eliminated, they could freely pray in Al-Aqsa compound. You see the militants that are heading towards the Temple Mount compound or towards the Qubat al-Sakhra, the Dome of the Rock. You see the flags, the Iraqi and Yemenite and Palestinians and Syrian and Iranian and Lebanese, and they are all heading towards the Temple Mount compound, towards the Qubat al-Sakhra, the Dome of the Rock. And if you could see on both sides, there are huge waves on both sides. The reason I show you this is because Hamas titled October 7 attack on Israel in the name in Arabic Tawfan al-Aqsa, which means the flood of Al-Aqsa. So you see here this narrative that is kind of like resonant in this poster that you see in front of you. But when you look at the impact of the axis of resistance across the Middle East, starting as of the last third of the 20th century and up to our times, you basically see that this is what the axis of resistance has inflicted upon the nations in the Middle East. Destruction in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq. Lebanon is crumbling. Yemen is torn apart. Syria is ruined. Iraq is torn apart. In Gaza Strip, as an outcome of the repeating military rounds with Israel. This is the outcome of the axis of resistance. And if you want to illustrate it on a map, that map gives you the figures so you can understand the scale of the devastation and destruction the axis of resistance has inflicted across the Middle East for the last 40 years and so. It's interesting, by the way, to notice that in some Western circles following October 7, the story of resistance, the axis of resistance, is being romanticized. It sounds very romantic, the resistance. There is nothing romantic about the resistance. It has inflicted an enormous destruction, death across the Middle East. It is therefore no wonder that at some point the Arab world started to internalize and realize that actually this whole story of the axis of resistance that will allegedly liberate Palestine, this is actually a Trojan horse. When you look at this, one of many posters or cartoons published in the Arab world, this one reflects very clearly that notion. You see the horse, the wooden horse, and the rider says Iran. You see the arrow says in Arabic Al-Quds. This is the Arabic name of Jerusalem. The arrow is pointing at Quds. The horse, of course, represents the axis of resistance under the Iranian leadership. And allegedly, this horse is going to Jerusalem, to Al-Quds, to liberate Al-Quds. This horse is going nowhere. What this horse is doing is to crush Arab state, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria. This is what the axis of resistance has inflicted upon the Arab world. A very significant component in this whole structure of the axis of resistance is known by the name of the Ring of Fire. This is the blueprint for the elimination of the state of Israel. The guiding concept is that when the time comes, those militias, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Iraqi Shiite militias, Ansar Allah in Yemen, under the guidance of the Mullah regime, they will join hands together and they will attack Israel at once from all directions, pouring down hundreds of thousands of missiles and rockets on Israel, and dozens of thousands of militants will storm Israel from all directions, and that will be the end of the state of Israel. There is something very significant to understand about this Ring of Fire. This is a long-term strategy. It's not something that was born overnight. It is a long-term strategy that was very well calculated and built during the last couple of decades. And in that context, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are key components. Why are Hamas and Islamic Jihad are key components? It has to do to the nature of the relationship between Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Sunnis, and the Mullah regime, the Shiites. Remember that we asked ourselves, what brings them together to the table? It's a marriage of convenience. For the Mullah regime, the escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a strategic interest. Why? Because the more the conflict escalates, the more the Mullah regime could continue and market the story of the axis of resistance, saying to the Arab world, well, we are arming those militias, we are interfering in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iraq and in Yemen and in Gaza because we are preparing for the day we will liberate Palestine. But somebody needs to fuel the escalation of the conflict. The Iranians are not going to do them themselves. They need somebody to do the dirty job. Here comes the role of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Their role is to fuel the escalation of the conflict. If you look at the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the last 40 years, particularly following the signing of the Oslo Agreement in the 90s, when you look at the trajectory of the conflict, you see that Hamas and Islamic Jihad were the major perpetuators of the escalation of the conflict. That's what happened on the ground in the last 40 years, and it's not random. It's part of this program of the Ring of Fire. A very significant component in that is the concept that is known by the name of unifying of the arenas, or in Arabic, Wihdat al-Sahat, meaning this is the day of unifying of the arenas, the day where all the militias are joining as one and eliminate the state of Israel. That day has allegedly a date. The date for that was October 7th. how we got to October 7. This has been the trajectory that led to October 7, and it was brewing and evolving over decades. It didn't start not yesterday and not 2 years ago. Hamas is launching October 7 attack under the impression that the day has come of unifying of the arenas. Hamas' impression was not baseless. Why? Because in the months before October 7, there were meetings of Hamas colleagues to the axis of resistance. Hezbollah, Iraqi Shiite militias, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards in Tehran, including meeting with the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, in the summer of 2023, couple of months before October. And what Hamas hear from his colleagues is they are saying to Hamas in Arabic, they are saying, "Ihna jahizun," which means we are willing, ready, and able. So Hamas is launching October 7 attack under the impression that the day of unifying of the arenas has come. And one of the major incentives for Hamas to do that is because Hamas says, now, when the day of unifying of arenas has come and the state of Israel will be eliminated, we, Hamas, we will decisively win the power struggle with the Fatah, the other major Palestinian players, the spine of the Palestinian Authority that I mentioned in the beginning. We, Hamas, we will decisively win the competition, the rivalry with Fatah, and once and for all, we, Hamas, we will be the leaders of the Palestinian people. We will be the one who will dictate the trajectory of the Palestinian people, and that will be a step in our long-term ideology of establishing caliphate. Interesting enough, in some Western circles following October 7, people are echoing the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." They think that by echoing that, they are echoing Hamas' objective. That is not Hamas' objective ideologically. Hamas' objective, remember, is coming from the caliphate vision, where they reject the concept of national statehood. Fatah, the major Palestinian other factor, rejects the concept of caliphate and endorses the concept of national statehood. Hamas basically says, we think people should live their life according to the Islamic religious codex. The Fatah says, no, it should be based upon a parliamentary-based legislation. Hamas says, we will never ever recognize Israel's right to exist. We committed to the concept of al-muqawama al-musallaha, the armed resistance, until Israel will be eliminated. The Fatah says, we don't stand for the concept of the armed resistance because it basically led us to a dead-end street. We are standing for the al-muqawama al-silmiya, the non-violent resistance. So right there you see that there are major differences between these two major Palestinian organizations, and the competition and rivalry between the two intensified following 2007 when Hamas crushed the rule of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza Strip violently, and ever since then, all the attempts of the Muslim leaders and Arab leaders to reconcile the sides, all those attempts failed. The gaps between the two camps are actually non-bridgeable. In the Arab world, there is an interesting phenomenon that is kind of like absent from the Western discussion. And that is the fact that the Arab world before October 7 and particularly following October 7 holds Hamas accountable to what happened. The Arab world says to Hamas, the criticism in the Arab world on Hamas centers around two major issues. The Arab world says to Hamas, look, you took control over Gaza Strip in 2007, terminating the rule of your brothers, the Palestinian Authority. You resulted a split within the Palestinians, fine. You now took Gaza strips from 2007 to a dead-end strip. You took your own brothers and sisters to a repeating military rounds against Israel, which resulted nothing but destruction and death in Gaza. You didn't liberate Palestine, you didn't liberate Al-Quds. All you did was to cause suffer and misery upon your own brothers and sisters. This is one focal point of the criticism. And the other one, the Arab world says to Hamas, you are doing that in the service of the Mullah Shiite regime in Iran, the bitter enemy of the Sunnis and the Arabs that you, Hamas, part of. It's the same Mullah regime in Tehran that butchered your brothers, the Sunnis in Syria, including, by the way, the Palestinians in Syria. So, what are you, Hamas? Are you Arab Sunni, or are you basically a servant of the Shiite Mullah regime? That criticism, as you can understand, boosted following October 7, particularly against the background that it was very clearly, became clear to the Arab world that what Hamas did in October 7 was to inflict an enormous destruction upon his brothers and sisters in Gaza Strip. And at the same time, was basically deceived by his own bodies to the axis of the resistance. Because Hamas is launching October 7 attack, but the other militias didn't join fully to the war, particularly Hezbollah. Hamas basically turned to their colleagues and said, where are you? The day of unifying of arenas has come. We launched the attack. Where are you? They didn't join in. Not fully as Hamas was thinking it's going to be. And so in the Arab world, there is an enormous criticism about that. This is an interesting cartoon that was published towards the end of October 23, almost a year ago, more than a year ago. And it was published in a very significant Saudi-owned media. It's called the Sharq al-Awsat, which means the Middle East. The cartoonist here is very well known. His name is Amjad Rasmi. And you see there are two parts of this cartoon. You see the figure standing represents the Mullah regime in Tehran. And you see on the left-hand side there are two figures, black and white. The black has a yellow bandana representing Hezbollah. The white has a green bandana representing Hamas. They are ready to be launched to the fight. You see the arrow pointing at Israel. And then you move to part 2. And you see that the Mullah regime gives the sign. Hamas is off to fight Israel. But the Mullah regime, Hezbollah remains in its place. It is not joining. And if you look closely, you could see that it is chained to the Mullah regime. The message of the Arab world to Hamas is, you launched October 7 attack because you thought that the day of unifying of arenas has come, and basically what you have done, you have inflicted the biggest catastrophe ever upon the Palestinian people since 1948, and you did that because you believed the Shiite Mullah regime in Tehran. You sacrificed your own brothers and sisters at the altar of the Mullah regime in Tehran. You, Hamas, are accountable for the disaster that happened to the people of Gaza, your own brothers and sisters. So Hamas is conducting October 7 attack. The others are not joining in. The war now is expanding in Gaza Strip, and quickly the Mullah regime in Tehran is becoming concerned, because what's happening is that Israel does not end the war. Hamas is not releasing the hostages. The war in Gaza Strip intensified, and as the war intensified, Hamas is being cracked and beaten to the ground. He's losing his rule. He's losing his military spine. The Mullah regime starts to internalize that what is happening right now, that he is losing a significant arm. Remember, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, in the context of the plan of the unifying of the arenas and the Ring of Fire, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are the factors that their mission is to perpetuate the conflict. But if this wing, if this arm is cut off, who is going to perpetuate the conflict? That's a bad news for the Mullah regime. The downfall of Hamas rule in Gaza Strip is a bad news for the Mullah regime. They need to try and to save Hamas rule in Gaza. And to do that, they are starting to activate its different proxies across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, October 8 is pounding the Israeli northern communities. Very quickly, Iraqi Shiite militias are starting to attack United States bases in Iraq, in Syria, in Jordan. In between, they are attacking Israel. Houthis in Yemen are starting to attack also Israel, and particularly, they are starting to attack maritime trade in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait right here, which is one of the most significant strategic locations in the world, connecting the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, leading to the eastern basin of the Mediterranean and Europe. The purpose of this coordinated, orchestrated, integrated attacks is, in the end of the day, to put pressure on the United States, on the international community, to put pressure on Israel to stop the war in Gaza. But that's not happening. In fact, what happened is that we reach points of major escalation to the point the world is deeply concerned with the scenario of a whole-out war across the Middle East. You may remember April 13, Iran is attacking Israel for the first time from Iran. It was intercepted by a US-led American coalition. The world was now looking to see what would be Israel's response. Israel's response was kind of like symbolic, sort of speaking. And then you got another milestone. The Houthis are sending drones to Tel Aviv, killing one person. Israel response, this time the response is not symbolic. Israel is actually significantly damaged Hodeidah port. This is the major pipeline of the Houthis in Yemen, 1,600 miles away from Israel. And then you got the story of the attack on the beepers, the calls beepers of Hezbollah in Lebanon, basically neutralizing thousands of Hezbollah's militants. In parallel to that, Israel is eliminating the whole leadership of Hezbollah, the military and the political, including Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah. In parallel to that, Israel is eliminating most of the leaders of Hamas as well. So the world is looking at these whole milestones and say, we are heading to a major whole-out war. In the end of September, Israel starts ground operation in South Lebanon to eradicate the military infrastructure of the Hezbollah in south part of Lebanon. October 1st, the second Iranian attack on Israel, 180 ballistic missiles. At this point, the world is basically saying, that's it. We are for sure now going to see an Israeli strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities, on the Iranian oil facilities, and that means a huge war across the Middle East, where there is a significant Israeli response this time, but not addressing the nuclear facilities or the oil facilities, not less important, addressing and damaging significantly Iran's anti-aerial defense system. So you see that there is a process of escalation leading to those milestones where the world is kind of like looking to see what's going to happen. As of now, in the context of the war in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, as I said in the beginning, there is a ceasefire agreement that was recently reached. Basically, currently, it's very fragile because the sides are still kind of like trying to make last call, sort of speaking. So we'll have to see if this fragile ceasefire agreement will be continuing. Remember, we have today something like 70,000 Israelis that are refugees from the northern communities because of the Israeli-Hezbollah skirmish. There are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese refugees also because of the Israeli-Hezbollah skirmish during the last year. Couple of notes concluding my presentation very shortly. When you look today, more than 1 year since October 7, you see something very interesting. In October 7, Israel was, of course, in a rock bottom for many different reasons, of course. One of them is the fact that the region views Israel as a declining force, losing its deterrence capacity. Some basically were saying this is the inevitable end of the state of Israel. Israel is disintegrated and so on and so on. 1 year later, you could see that quite definitely Israel has been significantly re-establishing its deterrence capacities and image, particularly given to the outstanding technological and military and intelligence capacities that Israel has been demonstrating during the year since October 7. One other thing that is in parallel to that is the weakening of the axis of resistance, the substantial damage caused to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to Iran. All those things basically weakens the axis of resistance, which for itself is a good news, taking into consideration the negative impact of that axis on the region. However, one of the interesting things to see is the ripple effect following that. Like, for example, in Lebanon, there is now boosting of the Lebanese demand that are saying to Hezbollah, we are not going back to the same situation in October 7 when your Hezbollah was the one dictating our path with your Iranian weapon. We are not willing to go back there. You need to be part of the Lebanese state as a legitimate player. You need to disarm yourself, and so on and so on. On the one hand, it's a very significant positive, potentially, development. They are basically saying, the Lebanese, we want to restore our kidnapped sovereignty that was kidnapped by Hezbollah. On the other hand, there is a big question mark to what extent they can do that, because Iran and Hezbollah are determined to restore very quickly their grip on Lebanon. So it's an open question today, what is going to happen in Lebanon. Another significant ripple effect that is happening right now in Syria, the ignition of the war in Syria, a massive offensive of the Syrian rebels in the northern part of Syria, that basically right now is resulting in enormous aftershock waves. One of the major reasons for this offensive in this timing is the weakening of the axis of resistance, because Iran has been establishing a significant presence in Syria. During the war in Syria, Iran, together with Russia, basically saved Assad rule. But now, when Iran is significantly weakened, and particularly given the fact that its most significant proxy, the Hezbollah, that was very proactively involved in the war in Syria and was a very significant player in saving Assad rule, now the Hezbollah is significantly beaten. Now the ability of the Iranians to support Assad is much more difficult. So we see here an interesting ripple effect that basically results in, among other reasons, to this major offensive of rebels that we see in the northern part of Syria. In Iraq, we see something similar in the sense that now there is refueling of the power struggle between Iraqi Shiites nationalists who wants to preserve Iraq's independence and keep Iran out of Iraq, and between the Iraqi Shiite militias that I mentioned before that are basically prioritizing Iran's interest over Iraq's interests. One other thing that will be very interesting to see, what will be the ramification in the context of a possible Israeli-Saudi rapprochement. Roughly speaking, I would say that the weakening of the axis of resistance gives more space and maneuvering capacity to stabilizing forces in the region that are looking for stabilizing the situation. And major Arab states are involved, and on top of them, of course, Saudi Arabia. That could be potentially one of the outcome of this ripple effect that we are talking about following October 7. And one last thing in the context of the Western discussion in October 7 and post-October 7. I gave a couple of examples that actually manifest a very deep misunderstanding or inability to really understand what's going on in the region as it's been reflected within some Western circles. And in that regard, I need to point out two interesting things. When you look at the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the last 40 years, as I said before, you see it has been enormously escalating. Dozens of thousands of Israelis and Palestinians were killed in the escalating Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 1987, the first Palestinian Intifada used to be known by the name of the Stones Intifada. Today we are dealing with rockets and missiles and cyber attacks and tunnels, and you just name it. The interesting thing is that while there has been such an enormous escalation of the conflict, in the Western discussion for the last 40 years, particularly in the intellectual and academia and media conversation, it was mostly centered around the concept of two-state solution and peace, which was totally detached of what was going on the ground. And this detachment, I think, could be explained in a couple of reasons, like, for example, the fact that when you look at the discussion in those Western circles, what you see is that what was emphasized in the discussion is the narratives of the sides. The Palestinian narratives that talk about settlements and expansion of settlements and genocide and occupation and justice and injustice and so on and so on. The Israeli narratives that says the Palestinians doesn't really want peace, they have rejected everything that they will offer, you have nobody to talk, Hamas is a terror organization. The narratives became the center of the discussion in the Western circles. The issue is that the narratives have been viewed as if they are the root cause for the escalation. But they are not the root cause for the escalation. The root cause for the escalation is the picture that we saw today, showing you these big powers, these huge currents, some of them historic, some of them contemporary, that resulted in this trajectory leading to October 7. And another reason for this failure of reading the story of what's going on is unfortunately has to do with the fact that the educational discussion to a large extent has been flattened. It has become subject to buzzwords and slogans and concepts and theories that sounds very nice and very compelling, but the problem is that they don't offer any ability to understand the complex reality. And when you don't have the ability to understand complex reality, definitely you don't have the ability to positively shape and impact such a reality. Therefore, this is the guiding logo of theme of our work, basically saying, in the end of the day, if you want to understand Israel, if you want to understand the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you need to understand the Middle East. Because at the end of the day, these are the major factors and figures that are providing the information, the understanding that is so crucial. What we need is actually to restore the building blocks of education. Context and nuance and critical thinking and understanding who is involved and why. What comes first, what comes second, what is action and reaction, cause and outcomes. All those things that unfortunately has been pushed to the side in the last generation at the altar of a flat discussion, suffocated with buzzwords and slogans and concepts and theories, as I mentioned before. The issue is that if you compromise the level of education, you are not only compromise the ability to understand the complex reality, let alone to impact positively such reality, you are basically also resulting in a situation where the building blocks of a functioning society are pushed aside. And when they are pushed aside, what you got is polarization. And this is something that I believe we are all familiar with. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm concluding my presentation and opening this session to your questions. With your permission, I will just say that question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark.
there anyone Israel can speak to in order to get the hostages back, since it's dividing Israeli society?
Look, as we understand from the reports, there are negotiations or talks trying to result in a deal to release the hostages. I don't know to say the ins and outs of those discussions. As you accurately mentioned, it does clearly add to the already polarization within Israeli society. I wish I could say that I can say positively or decisively there is a light in the end of the tunnel. I don't know to say positively yes. I don't know to say positively no, because I don't know the ins and outs of the current situation. There are reports that there is an expectation for some sort of like a breakthrough or a progress in the negotiations over the issue of the hostages. Can only hope that this is something that will materialize as soon as possible.
Can you, in the earlier part of your presentation, which is just wonderful, thank you so much, you indicated that this October 7th pivot date was a idée fixe, as it were, in the axis of resistance, and of course, you didn't mention anything about internal Israel politics. How is it that Israel missed that? Or maybe you can talk to that issue.
Yes, of course. Again, I'll try to do it shortly. The bottom line is that on the one hand, there was knowledge, and it was a scenario. The scenario of October 7 was known to the Israeli intelligence community. Even it was described in details, very much one-to-one to what happened on October 7, which obviously, boosts the sense of the failure. The issue is that in the end of the day, from an intelligence perspective, in the end of the day, you are supposed to come to the policy makers and the policy and the decision makers and say, look, this is the picture on the ground, these are the different scenarios, these are the different potential possibilities, and we need to prioritize. What do you think is more likely to take place? What do you think is less likely to take place? Because the meaning of that is resources and means that Israel and the Israeli policy makers and decision makers have to allocate according to the recommendation presented by the Israeli intelligence community. The opposite example that I can give you is in the context of Israel and Hezbollah. Following 2006 war with Hezbollah, there was a clear understanding in Israel there is an enormous need to put an enormous intelligence effort in understanding Hezbollah, decoding Hezbollah, infiltrating to Hezbollah, and all those things. Accordingly, an enormous resources were allocated to that purpose, and they bear fruits, as we saw during the war between Israel and Hezbollah. So it gives you an opposite example of the story of Hamas. The guiding concept was, in the end of the day, that Hamas established itself a kingdom, a caliphate, an emirate in Gaza Strip. Hamas wants to keep its rule. Hamas wants to maintain quiet in Gaza Strip. There has been some unquiet and unrest in Gaza Strip. So the guiding concept within Israeli intelligence officials and therefore Israeli policy making was and decision maker was that Hamas is not heading to something like that. It was wrong.
Thank you very much for very, very, very informative talk. Do you think that it's likely that the Assad regime will collapse in Syria? And if so, who is likely to take over and how will that impact the Middle East?
Yes, that's a good question. I'm sure that currently many intelligence agencies in the world are very much busy with this question. At this point, the picture, as I see it on the ground, there is a significant momentum of the rebels. Assad regime is definitely in a difficult situation. It is further emphasized due to the fact that its allies, Iran, Russia, the Hezbollah, as I mentioned before, are weakened. Russia is engaged in the war in Ukraine. Iran and Hezbollah, we talked about what happened to them during this war. So that basically further, makes the dire situation of Assad more dire, so of speaking. But just at the same, we should remind ourselves that when the war in Syria started in 2011, the expectations and the estimations were that Assad war is going down with a couple of weeks. It didn't happen. So I would say that at this point, the picture is still not clear. I would say that one thing is for sure, is that potentially this dramatic development in Syria already is resulting some ripple effects, and the more the momentum will continue, if it will continue, leading, if in the end, to the downfall of Assad regime, that at this point is a question mark. Obviously, we are looking at a very, very dramatic, pivotal moment, and I think that that development in Syria very well dialogue with what we have been talking here tonight, when we basically talked about how these many layers of this very complex region are intertwined and interacting and impacting one the other. I would say at this point that from an Israeli perspective, Israel is following very closely what's going on. Roughly speaking, it's more located in the northern part of Syria, relatively remote from Israel borders at the Golan Heights, but definitely I would say that in the Israeli perspective, there are, and going back to the previous question about being prepared, I would say that definitely I would assume that in the Israeli military and intelligence communities, there is a preparation for a potential scenario of further momentum of the rebels percolating down to the south, even though it's not necessarily something that will happen. It may be what we call post-horizon scenario, but this is something that we definitely should be looking at. But in any case, already by now, it's a very significant development. The more it will continue, if it will continue and get momentum, the bigger ripple effect is.
Thank you. I had a two-part question, part of the answer to which you already gave, but it seemed to me that Israel's failure to see Hezbollah's, Hamas's attack last October was an incredible intelligence failure on Israel's part, probably the worst since maybe 1973. How did that happen with Israel? Nevertheless, since that time, it seems to me also that Israel's been remarkably successful in degrading both Hamas and Hezbollah. In addition, Israel's latest attack on Iran is, I think, has been more successful than is generally acknowledged. And Iran is in a position of relative helplessness right now. Why isn't this a great time for Israel, and possibly with the assistance of the United States, particularly since Donald Trump will assume the presidency shortly? Wouldn't this be a great time for Israel to decisively attack Iran's nuclear facilities, Bashir, Isfahan, Natanz, the others? Israel might even get some assistance from Saudi Arabia in that respect, or at least no active opposition.
Well, I'm not a military expert, but to the best of my understanding, based upon analysis of military experts, I think there is a common assumption that Israel doesn't really have the military capacities to eliminate itself the Iranian nuclear facilities. This is a task that basically is appointed upon the United States of America. That's one element. The other element is that Israel actually says, look, the Iranian nuclear issue is not only a threat to Israel, it's a global threat, and therefore it should be addressed by the world decisively. I think that the rhetoric coming from Israel threatening to move and act independently if there is no decisive move by the international community to stop the Iran nuclear program, I think that to a large extent it's more of a rhetoric, because again, as I said, to the best of my understanding, based upon military analysis, Israel doesn't really have the ability to do that. I don't think that, by the way, Trump administration will also is in favor. I don't think that he's in favor of military action. I think, however, it's likely that Trump will toughen these sanctions on the Mullah regime, taking advantage of the weakness of the Mullah regime right now. And that maybe will be something that in the end of the day will be more productive, sort of speaking, in comparison to a military move.
Thanks very much. This is a very interesting presentation. I'm curious, in the context of the historical background, it would seem that the U.S. State Department has been naive to this history. And I'm curious what your take is, because the decisions that have been made over the last, the current administration and certainly during the Obama years have been completely in ignorance to your presentation of the actual history on the ground. I'm curious, what do you think of does no one in the State Department understand this stuff?
I don't know. I'm not part of the State Department. I've never been part of. Look, it's a good question. I'm kind of like, I must admit that I'm debating about the answer for it. Why am I debating? Because I can tell you decisively that Western agencies knew exactly what's going on the ground. Why do I say that so decisively? Because the recent declassified documents of the British Foreign Ministry that were recently published basically indicate that already back in the 90s, the British intelligence knew that Iran is activating Hamas and Islamic Jihad to topple down the Oslo Accords. They knew that. If the British intelligence agency knew that back then, I would assume that the American agencies also knew that. On the other hand, I am familiar with the fact, as you accurately mentioned, that when you come across some statements made by people that are supposed to be knowledgeable, or when you look at the policy that was conducted by American administrations vis-a-vis the region for the last couple of decades, you can see clearly that the policy chosen was not dialoguing with what was going on the ground. Whether it was stemming from ignorance, naivete, different political agenda, this is an open question. I cannot answer that.
Avi, the documentation of Israel's intelligence failure is well known to everyone, Israelis, of course, most of all. But your comments about Hamas, which I've heard before, talk about failures. Hamas thought that through Iran, that this was the day of unification and they were all going to attack Israel. I mean, what were they thinking? Didn't happen. They had those meetings, you said, a month or two before. Why didn't it happen? And now we have found in Lebanon that Hezbollah had underground tunnels and they were pretty well prepared to jump in. What did Hamas miss?
The current explanation, which I think needs to be further explored, but in the absence of another explanation, I think that's the explanation for the time being that I can provide, is that Hamas basically did not share with Hezbollah the exact timing of the attack. Hamas was concerned that if he will do that, it will leak to the Israeli intelligence. And so Hamas apparently said, we know that the Hezbollah is ready, willing, and able. You talked about the huge military infrastructure that Hezbollah was preparing. And we, Hamas, in the modus operandi of the attack, we prefer to keep it very close to our chest until the last moment. In the last moment, we will basically reveal the cards, we will share with Hezbollah, and we know that Hezbollah is already, roughly speaking, prepared. All it has to do is basically to move from a switch to readiness to action. And apparently, to the best of my knowledge, Hamas actually notified Hezbollah something like half an hour before the attack. Now, it seems that the first hours following the attack, there was inclarity. Apparently, Hezbollah as well didn't know what was exactly going on. And those were very critical hours. where basically the result of that was that Hezbollah did not fully join in. An interesting, the first month after October 7, the Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah was totally silent. Hezbollah attacked Israel on October 8. Nasrallah said, we are doing that until there will be a ceasefire in Gaza Strip, and then he shut up. And he disappeared for a month, and this is a guy that likes to talk. He disappeared for a month, and everyone was looking to see finally when Hezbollah comes out, what's going to happen? Is Hezbollah going to join in? He's not going to join in. But it was very clear already that he's not joining in. So a month later, Hezbollah is now appearing in the first public appearance since October 7. And obviously, I was on the line with all the big news media outlets, on the one hand holding the phone, and the other hand they're waiting to eagerly hear what Hezbollah, what Nasrallah says in Arabic, because they don't speak Arabic, they're British or they're American. And the thing that immediately captured my attention was that whenever Nasrallah was making speeches, there was some kind of like a poster or something behind him. Each time was different. And this time when he was talking, it was interesting because it was basically citing a phrase from the Quran, referring to an interesting term in Arabic, which can be translated to something like, you have been making a big mistake, now you have to pay for it. Basically, that was Hezbollah's, Nasrallah's message to Hamas in his speech, when he basically gave a 2-hour speech of a lot of hot air, but basically the bottom line was very clear, Hezbollah is not going to join in.
We have time for a few more questions, and one back here.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. My question is, does Turkey play any part in all that situation with, I know that stopping the trades and on and on and on?
Well, definitely. Particularly right now in the context of what's going on in Syria. Turkey is the major power beyond this reignition of the war in Syria. The major rebels bodies, the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, that are basically leading this operation right now, they are basically supported by Turks. To be more accurate, the FSA is a totally Turkish proxy. HTS is a little bit more complicated. The relationship between that organization, which is a major one, and the Turks is very complicated, but there is also an aspect of cooperation. Turkey is beyond this interesting development in Syria, and the reason for that is because the ripple effect that I was talking about. Meaning, Turkey has two major issues that bothers Turkey in the context of Syria. One is the issue of the Syrian refugees. There are some 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. That brings a lot of tension within the Turkish political and economic system. And the other thing is the story of the Kurdish autonomy in the northeast part of Syria that Turkey views as a threat. The Turks have been trying, particularly in the last year, Erdogan was trying to romanticize, to kind of like romance Assad, basically trying to engage in a diplomatic discourse to find solutions to those two issues. Assad was playing the game, hard, cold, basically not leading anywhere. And apparently, Erdogan came to the conclusion that now is the right time to do the continuation of diplomacy. They said that the war is actually the continuation of diplomacy in different ways. And this is exactly what he is doing. He's initiating that move, I think, under the objective of forcing Assad to come back with Iran and Russia, because it's very significant for Turkey, to basically ensure the interest of Turkey when it comes at least to the issue of the Syrian refugees. The problem is that the odds of success are very slim. So what we see right now is that a military initiative backed by Turkey, initiated by Turkey, in order to achieve some specific goals, not necessarily to topple down Assad regime, but what we see right now is sort of like a momentum that kind of like reminds a tiger that is spiraling out of control and nobody can ride this tiger, including Turkey. Turkey plays a very significant role in many aspects of the Middle East. This is one example as of now. I could give another example, of course, also in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. To a large extent, when we are talking about Turkey, we are talking about Erdogan, the president of Turkey, who has significantly changed Turkey for the last couple of decades. He is in power. And Erdogan is a very shrewd, cynical politician. Today he kisses and hugs you, tomorrow morning he kicks you out. It all depends what's the interest of. But Turkey is a very different, of course, significant player in the region.
Thank you for this. Do you have any predictions for the next few years?
Well, I guess my hair will become whiter. Unless I... prediction for the next few years. Well, it's an interesting question, I'll tell you why. Because in my work, I'm always providing predictions. The reason I'm doing that is because it's the only way that I can evaluate whether my reading of the reality is accurate or inaccurate. I can't find shelter beyond concepts. I must put my understanding and knowledge to the test of reality. Either I'm right or I'm wrong. So, I exercise what I preach. If you look, for example, in my articles and in my books, including the recent one, it was published in 22. Almost every single thing that happens in the Middle East since the publishing of my books in 22 happened. And these are things that I was predicting, including the Israeli-Iranian collision. So in that sense, yes, I'm providing predictions. So regarding your question, I would say, I don't know to say prediction, but I can say what I think will be a couple of major things that will be very significant in shaping the trajectory ahead. One is in the context of the inner Palestinian discussion, and that will center around the issue of the resistance and the role of Hamas within the Palestinian society and political structure. Hamas is not going to disappear. But what we should follow is to see what is going to be the content and the direction of the now new Palestinian discussion following October 7. In other words, is it going to result in a situation where Hamas is going to be significantly restricted within the Palestinian discussion and therefore will be unable to continue to dictate its radical agenda, or maybe not? This is one thing that we have to follow very closely. Another thing that we have to follow very closely is in the context of the Israeli inner discussion. It is logic to expect some hawkish, growing hawkish within Israeli political system and public opinion following October 7. However, talking about prediction, for example, and I will share with you prediction, I think that the upcoming Israeli government, whenever this government is going to be assembled, I think that the new government will be one that will center more around the core pragmatic Zionist perspectives, and I don't anticipate a significant strengthening of the Israeli ultra-national right wing. So this is my prediction in that context. Hezbollah is not going to disappear. I don't know to say what's going to be the aftermath of this war in the context of the Lebanese-Hezbollah relationship, but as a guiding full of thought, I would say we should have to definitely follow the outcome of what will happen in Syria and in the context of the axis of resistance. The guiding concept, roughly speaking, would say the more this axis is weakened, you could expect more, relatively speaking, conditions for further stability. If this axis is not weakened, if this axis is regrouping itself, you could expect a continuation of instability across the region. Those are, roughly speaking, the major things that I predict at this point. For other predictions, you're very welcome to go back to my book and to read them. And basically, the almost 99% of them have been materialized.
Well, thank you very much, Avi Melamed.
So that's the-